an introduction, and then we will come to you. Let me just make sure that I don't say something wrong. Was Hans Ulrich Schmid your father?
Absolutely, he was.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So I'll give it but what it'd be fun is just to, oh, we are live. Oh my goodness. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was just catching up with our guest about what we're going to do this evening. How fun. Surprised. We are live, Tom. I love it. Read your chat window. Well, this is the fun thing about being live online. Welcome to Adagio Live, the place where classic music happens. And we are no exception tonight. We've got a wonderful program, or I have a wonderful program. I have a wonderful guest, as you can see this evening. The Adagio ecosystem is becoming extremely interesting, that born of what is now the largest and oldest database for live streaming of classical music, built by classical musicians for the classical user interface, which if you're here, you probably already know, but you should spread the word, because if somebody wants to listen to classical music very often in other streaming or even download services, things come down in a rather crazy order, and actually the order of a string quartet makes a difference. I remember downloading, I won't say from where, a Mozart opera that I wanted to restudy. In fact, it was even one of my recordings. And all the music bits came in, and then all the recitatives came in. And if you didn't know where they went, you were just lost. That doesn't happen on Adagio.com, and that was the first wonderful claim to fame. Last spring, with COVID crises #1, I'm not sure what we would call it now, but we're certainly at least 2 or 3. And COVID crises #1 certainly pushed us forward in our already plans to have video on this streaming platform as well. And Tiljan Sokovic, the very enlightened owner and founder of Adagio, has always wanted to bring public and artists closer together. So the idea of doing Adagio Live, having either someone like an Ivan Fischer talking with the piano at the camera about Mahler symphonies, which you really should check out. It's fantastic. Or Kirill Gerstein, or me coming in on Tuesdays and talking about all sorts of things, song, and we've now branded that as Song and Beyond with the Hampson Foundation and the Adagio every Tuesday at 7. And Thursday is really a wonderful gift to me, I must say. It first started off interviewing colleagues and talking to people that I know very well, and letting you, the public, get to know my colleagues a little bit more personally like I do. But now it's developed into actually a wonderful interview program where I get to interview and talk to people across the gamut of our industry, the industry that makes music possible. And sometimes artists I don't know, sometimes people I don't know, I get to know them as well. That is one of the miracles of our digital revolution that we're in. If there is any positiveness to this crisis, it is that we have a new, accepted, and utilized digital universe that we find ourselves meeting not only our grandchildren, but colleagues on. Then in June, just to finish up the ecosystem of Adagio, of course, they started with the Global Concert Hall, which I like to call the third rail of performance, meaning that it is produced for analog and digital at the same time. And whether you're sitting there or you're sitting here, it is the same concert. And in fact, the artists that are there for you at that time are available in a digital green room. You have interaction with them. You have a much livelier presentation of the concerts themselves. And this has really taken the industry by storm, because as we keep going in and out of COVID lockdowns and availability, it has been, quite frankly, the saving grace to have classical music available to a very wide public across the world, which is not just a stopgap because of the crisis. I think it's a complete opening to a new dimension of how classical music can, if it has to prove anything, I'm not sure, but it proves its relevance. It stays with us. It allows you, the public, at any time to find your artist, your music, your boutique of listening, your experience under your circumstances. And should that be, as we all hope, buying a ticket and sharing in a room with people this experience, so be it, and wonderful. But we will always now have this digital augmentation and in German Ergänzung with it. And I'm very excited about that. So that's my preamble for tonight for Idagio.com. And now may I welcome you and Cornelia Schmid to Thursday nights with Thomas on Idagio Live. Hello, Cornelia. How are you?
Very well. Hi, nice to see you, Thomas. Very
It's
excited
great to
be
see you.
here. Yeah,
It's
same.
been a while.
It's been a while, absolutely. And I remember when and where. We were in Dortmund, if you remember,
Exactly.
sitting outside having a nice casual dinner with you and your wife and Kelly, I believe. So yeah, it seems like
And Kelly,
from a different
and
world.
just got a concert with Andres.
Sorry?
It was a concert with Andres and with Christine Opole.
Absolutely. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Wonderful. It was a
Nice.
wonderful time. Who would
Pre-COVID.
have thought we would have bounced here? Yes,
Exactly.
pre-COVID. Now, one of the things that's exciting about tonight and having you on is that I've had a couple of non-musical, if that's and please don't be insulted, and that's one of my first questions. But people other than artists, performing artists, I had Deborah Rutter from the Kennedy Center on. She's an old friend and so forth. You are an old friend and colleague. We've worked together in one way or another for several years, and are working now obviously more intensely together, and with some of your great artists and me being on your roster, and also with the Amsterdam Sinfonietta, which is where we did so many wonderful tours over the last 5 or 6 years. But I haven't actually had a guest from the European side talking about art, music, our world, COVID in and out, pre and past, and especially from the European side, because for you European guests tonight, one of my favorite words in German, and yes, we're going to stay in English, but we might bounce back and forth, is the word Bildung.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me, and we'll save this conversation for a little bit later. I want to catch up first on your biography, but the question of Bildung and the role of the Künste, the arts in society, is something that is paramount to our COVID crisis, in my opinion. But we'll save that later. We're going to go through all sorts of things. First of all, Cornelia, wonderful, welcome. Where you have such an incredibly interesting biography. You have studied in Bonn. You studied at Harvard. Your father was a legendary concert manager from whom you learned, and that is in fact your agency. Can you kind of give us a quick walk down memory lane? Where you started? Was there music in the house? Why did you want to study what you study? Where you did? Sort of 5-minute Wikipedia.
Okay, I'll try.
Please.
I'll try. Well, yes, there was definitely music in the house. My father was a studied pianist, coming back from the war as already quite an accomplished pianist, and then, wanting to study more, but he was quite realistic as well. And he realized after not too long that he wasn't going to be the world's greatest pianist. And then was very consequent and said, well, if I'm not a string player and can join an orchestra as a pianist, obviously that's much more difficult to find your place. And so he decided to leave the piano, professionally at least, and to become, to work for Steinway. That's where he started and he did a 3-year stint to become a businessman, basically, at Steinway. But he continued playing at home. So there was a lot of music in my home. And I was always impressed because I certainly wouldn't have the discipline that my father really practiced the piano almost every evening when he had no concerts
Wow.
to go to. And he was doing a lot of chamber music with me as well. I played the violin. I started at the age of 7. And we played a lot of chamber music. He was a great side reader, and I was not such great side reader, but we sort of went through all kinds of things that I could play, and it was fun. Not ever for the public because I was actually quite lousy, but it was fun. And sometimes with my mom.
What about did you have other people? Exactly. Did you have a quartet in the family? Were there other kids, other siblings?
My younger sister was the rebel and didn't want much to do with this kind of music making because that place was a little bit taken by me. So, but she did play the flute, but not the kind of instrument that would make a quartet. My mom played the cello, and she had a quartet with other friends. So I sometimes joined them. My mom was a doctor from actually,
All right.
then became a housewife when she married my dad, how it was in those times. But she was in the doctor's orchestra. So I played in the doctor's orchestra as well for a while. And then later in the student orchestra. And, yes, I did do a lot of chamber music. And I went on weekends where we had chamber music weekends with, through my teacher, with wonderful other hobby musicians.
And you grew up in Hanover.
I grew up in Hanover, yes, and I'm back in Hanover, so that's actually not so interesting. It's a bit boring, but
I think Hanover is actually quite interesting, but it's maybe not part of our story. But okay, let's leave Hanover and this wonderful eclectic background, and you go on, and you never had the bug to be a musician, but you wanted to do what? What did you want to study?
Musician was clear. I was never, near good enough. I never considered that. I wanted to study, well, actually, my father had the idea, I guess, that I should go into the business. And thank goodness I didn't do that right after school. But as I told you before, we went online. He had connections, so I was a guide at Tanglewood right after high school for 2 summers to get an impression, because he said, well, maybe you just want to see what the business is like. And of course, I knew a lot about it already because we talked a lot about the business, and there were lots of artists at our house. We had post-concert dinners with artists. So, I kind of knew what it was all about.
I have a question. When your father worked for Steinway, was he working as a concert presenter then? Have you, and then as you came aware of your father's business, was it always concert management?
At Steinway, he was not. He was selling pianos, basically.
Oh, okay.
And then he started a piano store with a colleague of his who he met at Steinway's. They started a piano shop in Hanover, and this was the time after the war where there wasn't any Steinway piano house. So they kind of looked at the map. They said, Hanover it is. They went from Hamburg to Hanover, opened the piano store and sold pianos. And then my father quickly got bored with just selling pianos, and he started doing concerts in the basement of this piano house. And that's how it started.
I get it.
And he did the concerts, and he started working for the pianists who did the concerts. So that's how the agency slowly started.
And that's what he kind of had his idea that you would work into that and be with him in a partnership in the business.
And I was fascinated, but on the other hand, I was also, probably it was a smart decision not to do that right away. And then I went on to study something completely different. My second big passion was always literature. So I decided to study literature. I started with law.
I realized
No, sorry.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Funny connection. But I want to go back to Tanglewood, because right after, I didn't realize it was high school. I thought it was actually later. So you really were you were a total apprentice. This was like, you went to America, you learned English, you were in Tanglewood, and at a time when the greats of the greatest were coming through Tanglewood, from Copland to Kusevitsky. What did you see, Kusevitsky?
No, he was not around anymore.
He was already gone, right? But he was alive still.
But no, it was after that. I mean, Seiji was the music director, Seiji Ozawa.
Okay.
And but Bernstein was there, and
how?
And how exactly, and lots of other, of course, legendary figures.
Fantastic.
And, it's a wonderful time to look back to, and I did get hooked a little bit to the business. But on the other hand, then my father thought maybe it's a good idea to study law, so you really know what you're doing. But that was very boring for me. I went to Bonn and I started with law, but after 2 semesters I got bored, and I decided I'm going to study literature, which is my second passion.
There you go.
That's what I did. And then I finished that. I got my MA in American literature. That was one of my specialties.
American literature in Bonn.
Yes. And a year I went for an exchange year to Harvard. That's where I focused on American literature of the 19th century, actually. And I wrote my thesis on Herman Melville. So.
Oh my God, Cornelia, I didn't know this. This is fantastic. See, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I say the whole Thursday evening is a gift. This is fantastic. Oh my God, wine's on me the next time. Herman Melville and Walt Whitman those are my guys. I mean, that's, woof. Amazing. And we would all do well to understand Melville a little bit better today. Thank you very much. But that's another subject. How interesting and how fun. So what was it like to be in Harvard?
Harvard was, that was the most fantastic time I had in America. I mean, after that, I wanted to stay there, basically, but it's expensive. I can imagine. So, I had a scholarship, a Fulbright scholarship for a year, and then it just, was just not really financeable. I guess it could have been, but, then I thought maybe let me go back to Bonn and finish my grade there. But it was a wonderful time. It was such an inspiring environment, and there was one of the greatest literature professors, a really legendary figure for comparative and American literature. And, this is some impression that you would never get in Germany. It's so, the whole
Right.
atmosphere is so different from any German university. And
Right.
such interesting and high caliber people all over the place, intellectuals of all sorts. It was a wonderful time.
So you came. That's quite a accumulation of it. And meanwhile, Dad is sort of watching all of this, and loving the development. Was he a bit skeptical about literature, and then got into it, or what?
My dad?
At the beginning, yeah. At the beginning, yeah.
No, I think he was quite open-minded. On the other hand, I think he was a bit disappointed maybe that I didn't want to join the business. But on the other hand, he was always giving us very free rein. I mean, my sister, wanted to always be a doctor, and she went off to Africa to do an internship at some mission station in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, my father was worried, but on the other hand, he was also, excited or proud that we were doing our thing. And yeah, no, I think we had and especially my mom also, she was a very open-minded person, and she always encouraged us to go our way. And maybe I sometimes got later the feeling slightly regretted that she had not, lived her life to the fullest. It was those times where married women were just at home with their husbands, and that's what she did in a wonderful way. But
she was a doctor as well.
She was a trained doctor, yes. She had worked in a hospital in Hamburg for 7 years before she met my dad, and then they got married and moved to Hanover.
Wow. I sang in Hanover a long time ago at the Opera House in
really?
1987, because I made my Met debut in 1986 as Conte alla Viva at the Met. And the Bartolo was Paolo Montarsolo.
Mm-hmm.
And Paolo was a wonderful guy, and we got along gangbusters. And he had been invited to some June opera festival, Unifest of Hamburger Oper, to sing Don Pasquale.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me up and he said, "Do you sing Malatesta?" And at that time, I had I'd already moved some time ago. But when I started in Zurich, that was the first thing I did here. Is I must have sung 35 Malatesta. So it was right in the forefront. So he said, "Well, you want to come to Hanover and do Don Pasquale with me?" And I said, "Of course, are you kidding? What an honor. It'd be fantastic." So I went to Hanover. I didn't know anybody. We had the obligatory one rehearsal, and we made everything up on stage. I don't remember the Norina or the Ernesto, but I remember spending 3 days with Paolo and eating incredibly good food and drinking wine and laughing a lot. But that was my experience. It was a beautiful weather. And I remember there's a wonderful park a little bit outside where you can walk on the dike or something like that. It was quite
the castle, the former castle gardens.
Ah, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, and now fast forward, I have 2 or 3 students who are studying in Hanover.
I was just going to say whether you are wondering whether you had connections to the
absolutely, and very good, very good mezzo, very good baritone. And I also had contact with a very interesting pedagogue there, Hans Müller, I think was his last name. It was a wonderful.
Was he a singer, or he's a singer, or
he was a singer and voice teacher, and he was working on the Winterreise, and he came and we worked on it a little bit together, and it was quite an experience.
The conservatory.
Müller was part of his name. It's wonderful.
Sorry, it's a bit of a shaky connection sometimes. I don't know whether it's me, but anyway.
No, it's fine.
The conservatory is a big asset for Hanover. It's really got an excellent reputation, and it's right next to our office, pretty much. We are in the same.
All right.
Yeah.
I need to come visit. Now, wasn't Igor Levit also in Hanover?
Yes. He's in Hanover.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised in Hanover. Absolutely. And now he's a professor at the conservatory.
There we are. There we are. Now we're coming to roost. All right, back to our narrative, because we're going to get right to it. So we have this amazing literature person. We have you graduated, and after you graduated, did you want to teach, right? Or did you just immediately fall in with Papa?
I wanted to work in a publishing company. That was my idea. But of course, I wanted to work in one of the great publishing companies, one of the literary one, like Rowohlt or Suhrkamp, or one of the traditional German ones. And that didn't turn out to be so easy. So, and actually, in the meantime, in Bonn, I had met my still best friend, funnily enough, who is a musician and violinist, but also on a not such professional level, but wonderful player. And she is from America, and she worked in an American agency in New York, KD Schmid. You may remember.
Oh my goodness me!
Yeah,
I knew her way back in the day. She represented Fischer Dieskau.
Yes, absolutely. And
for many
my
years.
friend had fallen in love and had moved to Bonn with her husband. And she was the one, and then I had in between also started going to concerts. Of course, concerts were always my other love, and making music. I was in the student orchestra in Bonn and so on. Went to concerts, earned my money with page turning. That was one of the.
I love it. I love it.
And then my friend Susan said to me, you know what? I mean, it's all great with your literature, but are you crazy not to go into this company? I mean, that is such an interesting job, and how could you not think about that? And then I thought, well, maybe she's got a point. And yeah, and that's how I decided, that I would join the company. Meanwhile, my dad had built up some potential successors, but that was all failing. So I sort of came at the right time, but also at the right age, because I was by then in my late 20s. And I had lived my own life. So I wasn't this young, innocent girl who came and didn't know anything. And that was good, because my father was a very open-minded, great man, but he was also quite a strong personality, and he was quite dominant. So, it was probably somehow all worked out to the best.
How long did you work with your father until he started phasing out or even handed you the reins?
Several years. I mean,
How long were you together?
4 to 5 years together before he then slowly started fading out, and he was still a consultant. And no, we worked a few years together. Oh, even 10 years, I think. Then he phased out. He started working more on the promotional side of the series here in Hanover. But we had many good years together, and it mostly worked out well. Sometimes there were fights, obviously, but usually it went well. And I learned.
And what happened?
Of course.
Oh, I can't imagine how much. What happened to literature? Hobby, love, passion?
Hobby. Trying to read when I have time, not as much as I would like. And that's one of the advantages of Corona. There's a bit more time for myself. So I've been reading more than usual, or when I travel, it's a hobby. Unfortunately, there's no more time than that. Also, and the violin has gone away altogether. No time.
I love that. Gone away altogether. Exactly. It sits on, do you even have a violin?
I do.
Or did you give it away?
I don't only have a violin, I also have a viola, because I also started the viola because when I was at Harvard, they were desperately looking for a viola player in the student orchestra, because nobody ever wanted to play viola. So I started that. And yeah, I still have the instruments, but the bad thing
Why is this thing about viola and all the viola jokes and all that? Why? I mean, some of them are very, very funny. I happen to adore viola. I think it's in some ways, between the viola and the cello is kind of where my resonance is anyway. I mean, violinists are great, and it's all, I mean, I never learned a string instrument at all. I mean, I come from the Northwest in America, and band was cornet or drums, or I played tuba for 3 or 4 years. But it's brass, and to do string instruments until much, much later in my life. But seriously, where does stuff about violas come from? I loved it when I heard in German, eine Bratsche ist ein Dieselgeiger.
Oh, that one I never heard.
A bratsche in English, that means a viola is a diesel violin.
Yeah, it's I know it's there's so many jokes. I also know a few, and I don't know. I guess because it's supposed to be easier, than normally not so many notes, easier
Oh, really?
parts. I guess that's why people think it's an instrument made for jokes. I don't know. It's I mean, I have to say I learned it rather quickly. My biggest problem was reading the key. That was
Oh,
tricky. But, you know,
well, I'm a singer, so I'm hopeless. You give me things, the old music and other keys, and it's like, no, wait a minute, what is that, up or down? you know, or you read, or, when you're studying orchestra scores, and I'm doing that more and more. That's you really. It's because in my world we don't spend a lot of time doing that, and you really have to. When you're listening, when you look at something and you have to immediately think you're a fourth or minor third or in another key, essentially
right,
running through the part, can play phenomenal tricks on your ears. I admire these. Well, I admire any conductor, but I admire these really young, brilliant young conductors that have mastered all that, and it's just self-understood. The conducting, this self-understood many dimensionality of hearing and seeing at the same time
yeah.
is really quite amazing. One should not underestimate what a conductor does. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to spend so much time, other than just getting to know you and how people get to know you, is that, and I wanted, ladies and gentlemen, this is for you, and that is that there's so much cliche in our business about how people act or rivalries or what people's functions are, or, what's he doing up there with the stick? I guess that's the easiest job. Or one of all these, there's all sorts of ridiculous craze or jokes like the viola. But one of them, I think, serious misunderstandings of our industry are people who aren't unnecessarily known, seen, and certainly don't walk on stage, but are themselves musicians, trained musicians, understand the repertoire, passionate about music, but make the entire industry possible. And that's where somebody like you come in from the management side, or a Deborah Rutter comes in from management and now into an organizational side. And there are many people. I mean, I could name a lot of at least past opera intendants that were, I guess we would call them failed singers, but I don't think that's fair. Somebody who says, look, that wasn't my path. Of course I love singing, but I'm going to go this direction because I have more to offer. And I try and actually tell my students when we're working in various classes, either Heidelberg or Berlin or wherever I am, there's learning music. And this is, I think, a political point that is also very difficult to land in today's conversation, not just COVID, but just in general. Having musical studies or having the study in the arts and humanities, but specifically music classes are not about the question of, well, don't we have enough people playing in the orchestras? What do we need to do that for? There is an essential connection to perspectives, historical perspective, economic perspective, interrelational, psychological perspectives, that you become more organized and rational and therefore empathetic in your thought process, whether you ever become a musician or not. And I love to encourage even some of my advanced students who are having serious doubts about whether this career path, for other reasons than just their talent, is really their path. And I say that decision should never be met with any sense of shame or guilt or non-achievement. It should be met on a find your path, listen to your drummer mentality. Do you see it that way as well?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I do see it that way. And that's even conversations we sometimes have, or often actually with young artists we have taken on. And even they, even if they already have an agency, or maybe just before they sign, they might have these doubts. And it's not about talent, I think. Of course, if you're so driven and so passionate and you really, really want this, but you have to have a lot of this drive, because there's so many circumstances which are part of a career, having a career. I mean, that better than anybody else. You're constantly on the road. You have to be very flexible. How do you lead a family life? All of those non-musical, non-talent associated aspects, I think, play a big part. And I think some people are wondering whether they want this kind of crazy balance in their life. And I think it takes a lot. I admire that people are so driven by their passion for music that they sort of live with all the other aspects which make a life as an artist difficult, I would say.
Do you think it's gotten I mean, you've been at this for a while, and there's two questions I have. I mean, let's just, I don't want to get necessarily political about this. On the other hand, it's pretty hard to talk about the business of art without it being in a political discussion, even though the beauty of art, I mean, I think the analogy I like very much is that, the most beautiful flowers are also planted in shit. So, so there's some pretty untowardly dimensions of our industry. But cutting to a more philosophical point, even in not even, but our careers have been somewhat parallel. I've seen a demonstrative difference between artist management and artist agents. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Over the last 25 years. I still came in on a wave of artist management. I was picked up by Sam Niefeld, one of the legendary managers at Columbia Artists, and Augenhöhe, a partner with Ronald Wilford, and he put me into Tom Graham in the European calendar, knowing that my life was between the sofa. So I had always a sense of advising, admonishing, being slapped upside the head, or no, Tom, at your level that we're booking you, you don't get to screw up. So there was a lot of pressure, but at the same time, they were, just as an example, they were people that, we would talk about times of repertoire. We'd talk about times to develop, how long to be in this place, or, I mean, that my life went very fast, but it was very much still part of the old school, brick upon brick, and I've seen that. One thing that bothers me enormously in the singing world today is that I see very few people in positions of hiring, not artist management, but hiring, who have the same measuring stick of longevity for artists that I had when I was a young artist. In other words, well, don't, for God's sake, no, you should not sing Giovanna d'Arco when you're 33 years old. That's not a good idea, Tom, as a lyric baritone. If you do that, you're going to go down, you could potentially get in the wrong, it's not going to happen. It's not a good idea. But I don't see people admonishing kids today are saying, well, no, you shouldn't probably sing that now. Oh, you can get away with it. It's a small theater is what you hear. Or even they don't even talk about it. They said, you've got a contract, do it. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Do you see that too? Is it a danger?
Yeah, I'm to be very honest, I'm not such an expert on the singers world in particular.
Right.
I would say in general, and it's going to be interesting how this will be post-corona, whether anything will change. I don't know. I mean, it's just an interesting time in that respect, because I think definitely career development has become much faster and much more, young artists are driven by the idea that they have to be successful very quickly. They have to sign with a major label. They have to win, when they win a competition, I've got to now make my career in the next 3 years, because after that there's the next competitions, and then the next brilliant artist comes out of them. And then, I don't have time or they don't think that way, but it actually, in fact, doesn't give them time to develop properly, just like you say, to learn repertoire. I remember when one of my most admired artists, who we have worked for decades, Murray Pariah, and I remember him. He was on our roster when I wasn't even part of the company, but I remember that my father always kept saying, Murray Pariah, after the Leeds competition, he took a year off. He took a sabbatical, and my father was tearing his hair out. But on the other hand, had a lot of admiration and, said, actually, this is a wonderful thing to do, because he had the feeling he was going to get overwhelmed and sucked into this business. And today, I don't see anybody doing that or daring to do that anymore at the beginning of their career, because they have the feeling, I've got to get out there. Otherwise, the next one.
I remember
the opportunity.
I was quite involved back in the day with Lenny and so forth with Deutsche Grammophon, and I remember when Christian Zimmermann stopped making records.
Yeah,
just
yeah,
and exactly. the leading, prophet of the company and seller and all that. So I just decided he needed to do that. I suppose it's similar to Horowitz taking 12 years off, which was kind of extraordinary. And well. But getting back to the let's talk about pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID. Where do you and I appreciate you wanting to come on and having this discussion. I mean, you are right now the chairman of the International Artist Management Consortium or group or whatever you call yourselves. In other words, other like artist management across Central Europe. Or is it North American?
No, it's
European?
Worldwide actually. Most of our members are European, but
it's worldwide.
There's some Asians as well and some North American. So it's actually worldwide. Yeah. But
okay, is this a yearly thing that gets rotated?
Is
this a yearly position that gets rotated?
No, it's elected. I've been elected for 2 years. Yeah, I've almost done my 2 years. And then you get either re-elected or you don't get re-elected. It's a position which isn't the term isn't fixed, or maybe I think it's 6 years now. So after 6 years, I will have to go, and I might be happy to go because I remember when
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, we have a managing director who, takes care of the day-to-day work, but so I am supposed to be just a figurehead of this organization. Just the spokesperson, so to say. And when he asked me for a long time, he said, and you can be absolutely sure it's not going to be a lot of work. So I said, okay, with you there, it's true. But then Corona came and not a lot of work. Yeah. It's a hell of a lot of work. Just on a political, if you want to say on a political level, not political, but within our business, talking a lot to the colleagues and exchanging information, trying to work on improving our business. And, how do we get, we as a business, artist management, out of this crisis? And what can we do different in the future for our artists or for our business model? Because actually some colleagues they're really in a bad way. Wouldn't even be surprised if some of them really won't survive because they have basically no income.
Well, I think that is I think I want this to be a candid discussion, and I don't want to ask you questions that are either uncomfortable, embarrassing, and you just don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to talk about that, but actually would be very enlightening to our public, I'm sure, and even to me as an artist. There just seems to be so many incongruous messages from the political realm that have a direct impact on the economic realm. And let's talk business model here. I get the impression that forget about America. For America is a different equation and is coming out of, if it is coming out of, a political disarray and volatility, political animosity that I have never seen in my lifetime. But it's not unique to the history of America. So let's all just put our seatbelts on and pretend that we're going to get through this mud bog. And certainly we're on a better path right now, in my opinion. But nevertheless, the whole question of business models, people going to concerts with or without COVID, well, obviously with the COVID crisis, and some sort of governmental subsidy, and we hear these huge numbers coming out of America of subsidization packets. They have nothing to do with the arts. So, but in Europe it is, but and what I really wanted to ask you about is that I have the feeling there was, especially in Europe, which is a much more definable social economic structure and political structure, that there was a lot of surprise at how deep, meaning financially, as well as numbers of people involved in a freelance pay for play industry that the classical art, that the classical music rests upon. And we're talking everything from dressers in the opera house to major stars that are not, why should we pay anything to anybody who didn't actually sing for their supper? And then, of course, that trickles down to the organizations themselves. And then some of the organizations said, well, okay, we're missing ticket income, but thank God all these ad hoc experiences, i.e. the artists that make their existence possible, no longer are current, and it's all force majeure. We don't have to deal with that. I mean, there's just been this huge vacuum right to the middle of our industry. And of course, that applies to artist management as well, because if I don't work, you don't have it. I mean, you're a commission basis, it's a partnership basis. So, I mean, am I missing something here? What is your Alltag been like? What kind of conversations? And let's talk about this business side of it first. Then I have a more societal Bildung questions that are even more important to me. But what has life been like the last 6 months, 7 months?
Well, to be honest, there has been and continues to be a lot of work. I mean, that's the ironic thing. You know, we're basically not earning any money, but it's not that there is no work. So part of the work is trying to fight for compensation for the artist, because I think it's just, and that's something we also are tackling very much with IAMA, because we just feel it can't be that the organizations who also, a lot of them in Europe, get public money from governments, don't pay the artists any kind of compensation. I just think that is really not on and outrageous. Of course, they're also very much suffering. It's for sure, if the organizations don't exist anymore, then the artists don't have a place to sing or to perform. That's understandable, but to not even acknowledge that, you know, that a minimal compensation might be possible, at least for the institutions who get their budgets covered by public money, I think they should think about it. So that's been quite a struggle, and we have succeeded in many cases. I mean, many promoters have seen the point and have been open to paying and have paid. And then then putting dates back in the diary is the next part of work. You know, finding dates.
And of course, COVID too didn't help. Everybody was getting a sense of, well, okay, it's restricted, but nevertheless, September and October actually saw a great deal of activity, and then boom, here came the numbers, and of course the numbers, the societal numbers that we're dealing with, and the crises of emergency wards and so forth. And please, ladies and gentlemen, do not misunderstand us. We are as deeply concerned as anybody about the pandemic that we're in. But then, and maybe this leads me to my next question, really, because there is absolutely no evidence anywhere that going to a concert or an opera has precipitated any illness whatsoever. And in fact, the presenting organizations have been some of the most strict regulations of rehearsal and testing. I'm about to do a couple of concerts next week. I will be tested every day I go to rehearsal. Every day I stand in front of the camera, and rightfully so. It's fantastic. But nevertheless, there seems to be this, and now we're going to the political, there seems to be this political unease to say, okay, well, we need to lock down, we need to shut the businesses down. No, you can't go to the restaurant after the concert, but in fact, the concert hall seems to be a safe place, so we're going to let you go into the concert hall. Well, no, the soccer stadium isn't a good place, and they're just not willing to have that conversation. So everything gets dumped into some concept of Freizeit activity,
Absolutely.
which... but I heard that Germany actually came out with a distinction of cultural events and activities versus other kinds of distractions, entertainment, or Freizeit activities. Is that true?
Just recently, this was just put into the law, which they got through Parliament last week. But this means months into the pandemic.
It's significant, isn't it?
It's significant, and I am glad about it, because we're now sort of culture seen on the same level, for instance, as churches. I mean, why should culture be different to churches? Because it's all about, well-being of human beings, emotional stability, consolation. I mean, all that churches give people is the same that music gives people. And so I'm very glad that worked. It's relevant. How much it will actually mean, I don't know. I think, like you say, politicians aren't really willing, for the most part, and there are always exceptions, of course, to really differentiate. I think it's, and they're very nervous to make mistakes. Obviously, this is a situation we've never had before. There's no blueprint for this. And I think politicians are scared and nervous to make any mistakes. But it's frustrating, because I think the promoters, the concert halls have proved that they have really, really good concepts, and that people can feel safe in the concert hall.
Well, I was pleased when I heard that from Germany, and in some ways it makes perfect sense because, like I said, my favorite word, Bildung versus
Mhm.
Ausbildung, is an inherent cultural understanding of the German-speaking realm. Having said that, it is disturbingly obvious that Austria and Switzerland have not taken that step, have not taken that distinction. And I don't want to, I'm not going to start pointing fingers here, other than that obvious fact. But what interests me is, and what I've said quite often, maybe you can disagree with me, as we start talking about opening up, as you know, that was the big thing about opening up the economies again, which is an incredibly relevant thing. Of course, we talked about survival things, we talked about necessary things, and health at the beginning, and the apotheke, and of course, then these takeout food and all these things. And I asked the rhetorical question, I think publicly once, how long will it take before all those necessary things of life come down to music, literature, psychology, sharing of common emotional moments in a concert hall, storytelling, Bildung, museums under protection. How long is it going to be before that it's not even trickle down. My concern is that we're losing a sensitivity to that conversation at all. Mm-hmm. Because we have let things go into the discussion of Freizeit activity. It used to be that we used to say, oh, the classical music is not the high end of the entertainment industry. And I, as an American, I mean, not just as an American, I find it, if a politician says to me, or anybody says to me, that the classical music is elitist, for me, and this is going to sound very strong, it identifies the ignorance and lack of Bildung of the person saying that. Because there is probably no stronger evidence of democracy post French and American revolutions and the development of self-determination inherent to the rights of democracy than how you make music, what you write as music, and what you express as the important thing in literature and music for other people to relish. The canon of classical music and classical literature and historical perspective is the blueprint. It's the essence of everything non-elitist. So how do we get out of this box? And please disagree with me. Let's bang this around. But to me, it's a philosophical problem that I get very concerned about.
Yeah, I agree. No, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think I feel absolutely the same way. And I think there are many people who feel the same way, but one has to state that there are also many people who don't feel that way. I mean, maybe the most shocking experience for me during this whole COVID crisis was when you listen to all kinds of things on TV or read the papers, how irrelevant for many people, how irrelevant culture is. And that has really shocked me because, in a way, and so I am disagreeing with you a bit, because in a way we're all living in this bubble and we feel like, oh my God, we're so important and we mean so much to people. And then sometimes you hear certain comments where, like, oh God, these artists, and they finally shut up and just take, the money, this Arbeitslosengeld, and just go home and shut up and be happy with what they get. So that for me was really shocking. And it sort of also comes down to my own feeling the worth of my profession. I said, maybe we're really not as relevant as we always thought we were. But I'm not letting that get me down at all. I mean, I think, but what's also true, I think, is that Bildung, what you so rightly cite and what should be so important, has not been such a high priority in schools. And I would say, Germany has always been proud of being this the Bildungsbürger. That is maybe one of the most German words one can think of. But it's almost now a slightly negative connotation sometimes. And unfortunately, the schools and the politicians haven't really done their homework with Bildung in schools as far as all the emotional subjects are concerned, like music. It hasn't been a priority. And so I think it's starting to slowly turn again and become more central because people realize how important it is. But I think we've lost almost one generation where it wasn't high on the priority list. was more the hard sciences and that is sad.
I agree.
That's worrying.
Yeah. In America, I often say that this argument is the exact evidence of what we did in America to two generations in the dismantling of liberal arts education. What used to be the banner of freedom in America has become a profitizing shareholder mentality, and everything that makes the arts possible is essentially the greater good. I mean, the philanthropic culture in America is an astounding phenomenon. The generosity of the philanthropic community on every level, visual arts, acoustic arts, is just, it's staggering. But you're seeing that there's rifts in it. The older generation, the grandchildren of the 60s generation, they don't have the same value. They don't have, and I think it's what I'm trying to do. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a philosopher here, but you can't help and you see it from your side and my side. You can't help but see the disconnect between education, liberal arts education, Bildung as a positive Ausdruck, a positive expression, that accompanies, enlightens, rationalizes, if you will, the tapestry or the texture of a society, regardless of the various vocations and avocations within the society. Yeah. And we live in an industry. You're absolutely right. A bubble is a very good example. And I hear these people as well. Oh, well, for Christ's sake, leave me alone with all this arts nonsense. I can't get my kids through school. And we're saying, oh, but their kids will be so much happier and they'll feel like so much better people with the shit job they're going to get after school if they just go to the arts. I mean, there's a real disconnect in this conversation that I think from the art side, we need to be very sensitive to. And I completely agree. So that drives me to what about repertoire? My feeling, what I'm hoping that we come out of COVID, because during COVID, we've had, especially in America, huge reflaming of civil rights questions. And appropriation questions and caste and societal questions, which are also splashing very much into the arts and saying, where are the various minorities represented in arts management, and as well as the artists themselves. And one of my passions and of my foundation is two things. First of all, the canon of creativity of African-American artists historically in our country is one of the most neglected jewels of the essence of America. And quite rightly, in the German-speaking countries, including Austria and Germany, a lot of our major artists, much less Langston Hughes, African-American artists, got their first international notoriety in German translation, which I think is quite powerful. My point is that maybe we'll start breaking out of the formula that presenters have been stuck in of what sells tickets. Yeah. And maybe we can ingratiate or invite an audience to have a larger conversation that they themselves will put pressure on the presenting organization. No, yes, Brahms is wonderful, but we don't need only Brahms and Beethoven. So can we have this or that augmented? And I hope that. Do you feel that as well? Do you think we can find a new concert repertoire thing coming out of COVID?
It's a difficult question, and because I think for the first time, people are going to be very careful because they have to make money. I mean, it's also about selling tickets, and maybe they won't be as adventurous. But on the other hand, I agree with you. I think we need to work on the relevance, and I think repertoire could be one way of being, in a way, more relevant to society, and like you say, more diverse, more about minorities, etc. So I do hope that that's going to happen, and I think it will, but it might take a bit more time than we think. And also maybe the digital aspects, that's going to become so much part of the music world, obviously, and you obviously doing a great job. And I'm not at all somebody who's embraced that world before, but now, it's obvious this will be it. And with the digital world being able to give so much more background also about, background for the audiences, that could really very much help to enhance certain, repertoire that we all don't know about, but should be curious to embrace. And if we can, if we
Exactly.
can support the concert goers more, then they will be too. I think it's basically, they also really rely a little bit on the recommendation of people who know and who can be convincing in what they do. And you're certainly a great example of being so eloquent and such an advocate.
Well, and what you're saying, it's not a zero-sum game. In other words, it's not Beethoven or all this other stuff. I think we will be in. I mean, I've done a couple of concerts in this crisis time, and live. I mean, I did a recital in July in Zurich, and there were about 400 of us there. And it was like we'd gone to a nurturing clinic. I mean, we were all just mainlining live music and poetry and thoughts and sounds and musical language. And, so what I'm saying is actually, I am hopeful that the repertoire coming out of COVID, which we will come out of COVID, painfully and slowly, but, there will be a post-COVID world that you're right. Most people are going to say, oh, I can finally hear my favorite symphony, Tchaikovsky, or whatever it's going to be, or Schubert, or whatever it was. But hopefully the presenters say, okay, we're going to give you your, what we call bread and butter, but we're going to bookend it with, or salt and pepper it with something you've never heard before. Because you need to know that what you just heard from Brahms inspired this 25 years later or 100 years later. It's maybe in the vocal world, you can do this quite easily.
Well, I think it's people need to make the connection, and that's why I think that has to do with not this kind of dry art for Musikvermittlung, which we know, but if it's presented in a way that people can really make the connections, I think it can work. And I think what we've also seen, even during the few weeks where we were able to do something in COVID, is that people are really open-minded, and they are happy to hear anything, really. I mean, even at short notice, if you tell them this concert isn't going to be, but instead so-and-so is coming with such and such orchestra and repertoire, they say, okay, fine. Well, we're so crazy to go back to concerts. We'll come to that. If you tell us this is good, then we'll come. And that's the spirit. That's what we need a bit more of, I think.
I'm sure that, I know that you guys in the International Artist Management Group, that you have, serious business model conversations. And we all know that the finances moving forward are going to be slow and maybe never return to what they were. It's, all those, we get all that. But I'm sure that one of the wild cards in your conversation is, how will the artists handle this? So if you were talking to me and I was representing 150 of the main artists in the world, what would you like to say to the artists? Are you comfortable doing that? What would you like to say moving forward as a message from the artist management group, stuck between presenters and these ambitious and needy artists? What can you tell us?
That's a good final one. Well, I mean, this flexibility that we're seeing now from artists, and I mean, it's amazing how flexible and how, how open-minded also artists have been, of whom I would have never expected that, not just time-wise, but also honestly talking about money fee-wise, because they see we're all in this together. And if we don't all give something, and then it's not gonna work. And I hope we can keep this spirit a little bit, the open-mindedness, in every respect, the flexibility in every respect, and not being so stuck on, oh, I need to know what am I doing in 24, 25. Also this planning so far ahead. I mean, in a way that's completely crazy. And I've always found that relatively crazy. I mean, for singers, I know it's very extreme because the opera houses plan so far ahead. But how do you know what you can sing in 5 years, or how do you even want to know? And also with programs for recitals, etc. And I think now people have discovered to be much more flexible. And I would wish that stays a little bit, that we all have a bit more of this adventurous spirit that the crisis has taught us somehow.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that's a wonderful thing to say, and I think that what you're saying is what a lot of us have always believed, but it's become very clear that we are presenter, artist, and management all in this together. We all know what we're talking about when we get artists from A to B in a car or a train or a plane and staying in some hotel and some rehearsal and some testing, and it's all very much related. So I agree with you. I think there has been, as we've come out of this, a much more a feeling of unanimity. There's always the suspicion that somebody's actually quickly making a little bit more on their side of it than the other side of it. But I guess that's just business. I really, the old American saying, all's fair in business, love, and war. I don't actually think so. I think there's a dimension to our classical industry that we must hold on to, and I want you to disagree or agree with me on this, and that is that all the business models in the world that we have, and all of the ambition that we as artists have, all that stuff that's inside of it, there's somewhere in your mind, in your heart, my mind, and what I do in my heart, that this is about a greater good. And yes, you should be paid for the greater good. You should be absolutely, free market, all that stuff. And if you can sell tickets and, all that stuff you can grade in. But at the end of the day, I always feel if you're not walking out on stage as an artist and feel like you're carrying with you something that's far greater and more important than who you are, that you're in trouble. Yeah. And this is what also, but the only reason that, and I want to say that not as any way patronizing or self-aggrandizing, this needs to be said from the artist community to people who have no idea. For those people who think, oh, shut up, don't give me this art crap anymore. This is where the breakdown is. They don't realize how fundamental we carry this in our hearts, and how nonplussed we are that nobody invited them to embrace, enjoy, and understand what belongs to them. I love to say, if you have to get into the arts, somebody stole them from you in the first place, because they are the blueprint of who we are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And I mean, what makes me a bit hopeful is that the crisis has also sort of worldwide, I mean, I don't know about worldwide, but I think people have been they've all of a sudden seen how vulnerable we are. I mean, we as human beings, our world, how fragile everything is. And that somehow, I mean, at least a few concerts I've been to in the last months, you could almost feel that. You could feel that people are more vulnerable, more, more emotional somehow, because they feel they've come to a stage. And I think that is the door through which the art can enter, to really make a difference to people, and to, but the artists have to have the ability to transport that, because that's the essence. I think you're the ones, we can't really transport much of that. You, the artists, can do that. And that's what's so wonderful about being an artist.
We make it together.
Working for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, well, yes, but I can't be there without you. And what I'm doing is making unbelievably important thoughts in a musical language or a poetic language audible for everybody. It's this shared thing. I mean, I love this. I love the motto of KD Schmid. I must say, your music means the world to us. I think that's, I don't know, that's a very beautiful statement.
Thanks.
Did you come up with that? Is that you?
Sorry?
Is that Dad? Is that you?
No,
is that
no,
Dad?
That's not Dad. That is quite recent, actually. That we did a so-called rebranding when we turned 60, when the company had their 60th anniversary. It was actually fun. We had a workshop, and how you do business workshop, your strengths, your weaknesses, threats, opportunities, etc. And we really came down to what is the identity? What do we really believe in? And then we somehow came up with this sentence, and I think it fits, and I think we take it really seriously. And I was never one for having one of these, branding sentences, but I have to say it does have a purpose, and it sort of sums up the spirit. And I think it's also good for the staff to know this is what we stand for, and this is what everybody in the office, no matter whether they're administrators or bookkeepers, or should strive to be, that we are there to support the industry, to make your life possible, to enhance art somehow. And I think we really mean that. And I'm also a bit proud of this sentence. It's nice, I think so.
And when somebody who's not in the industry reads that sentence, what do you hope that they get from it?
Yeah, that's the feeling that we really are there also to, in a way, it's maybe not so modern to say that anymore, but to serve in some ways, you know, to serve a greater good. Like you said, you artists carry a greater good. We maybe feel we serve for bringing forward, to make possible, to, you know, to enhance the possibilities for making this be heard, and not just, you know, none of, I think, hardly anybody in our office is in it for the money, because the money isn't so great in our profession. They'll never be very rich, but they all have this passion, and they all have the same spirit, that they're there for the greater good somehow. And that's what motivates them. And that's, if people get the feeling from this sentence that that's what our company stands for, and not just booking dates into artists' calendars, then that's what we want.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just met the extraordinary Cornelia Schmid and the wonderful KD Schmid agency, which is even a funny word to say, but agency, you know, and your father would be incredibly proud. You've been described as the most personal international artist agency on the planet. And I think we just heard why. Thank you so much for this conversation. Wonderful. I hope you, ladies and gentlemen, have had an opening of perspective of what we do, why we do it, and with whom we all do it, that makes everything from IDAGIO Live to Bruckner 3 or whatever some night possible. Anyway, thank you so much, Cornelia.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's been a wonderful hour. Great talking to you. I hope we can do it sometime with a glass of wine.